and gentlemen, I would like to welcome John McMullen, a intriguing poet with a very interesting background, both in technology and a man of letters. John, if I'm not mistaken, you've written as much technical material as you have poetry. And in fact, that's where you did your initial writing, if I understand correctly. Is that true?
Yeah, that is. I was an English major in college and wrote one poem for a magazine, for a college magazine, but I never wrote another one for 44 years. I got through a to look into technology. I wound up working for the government, and I had my choice of what I wanted to do. And I got into technology, and then I got into Wall Street, and then eventually had my own consulting firm, and in doing that, that got me that got someone to ask us to write a book about micro computers and telecommunications. And we did that, and then based on that, people asked us to do something. Then I became a columnist. Then for a while, I had an online radio show, and but it was all on technology. Then then to a quirk after 44 years, I was walking through through an aisle in Barnes and Noble, and I used to read everything but poetry, fiction, nonfiction, everything. And I saw a book with a very strange title, and I picked it up. And I brought it back to my table. I opened it. I said, "Oh, it's poetry." It was by Charles Bukowski, but I read it anyhow. And as mentioned later in a poem, he was a misogynist and a nut, and and everything else. But he had amazing talent. That, and I said, if he can do this, I can. I just happened to see an article that 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 inspired a poem, and I showed it to a teacher friend of mine, and then another one, and that person said, "You have to enter this in a contest." And I said, "Why would I do that?" He said, "No," he said, "just send it to this person." And it came back, and it won third prize in a national contest. It was only a $25 and a subscription to Poets and Writers magazine, but they had me hooked. So 14 books later, and columns and everything, I was off and running.
When you were a young man, even before college, what kind of writers impressed you? What writers caught your attention?
Mainly sports writers, people like or people like Jimmy Breslin or Pete Hamill, New York writers, and I wrote for various school newspapers, and as a matter of fact, when I was very young, I used to make up stories with comic book characters by cutting them out and by putting them around, and then I wrote a when Joe DiMaggio was retiring, I wrote something in school for an essay, and the teacher accused me of having to take it from someplace, and I said, "Absolutely not," and we got involved in that, and I was off in writing. I wrote for the high school paper, uh, I wrote for a college paper, and then I eventually got back into writing after I was writing about technology. Uh, our first book and our only book about technology was Micro Computers: A Window on the World, and it was published by John Wiley.
Very nice. Yeah, in those early days, Jerry Purnell was one of my favorites in the computer
Oh,
literature.
oh, sure.
Great
Purnell
stuff.
was well known.
It was another chap. Let's see if I can remember his name. Wrote a book called Computer Lib Dream Machine. He was
Yes.
very
Oh, yeah. Oh, come on. That was a terrific book. Who was it? It was I even had him on the radio, and, and I can't think of his
phenomenal
name.
writer.
I'll look him up. As we speak, I will look him up.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I was doing industrial audio for a living for my family, and he inspired me. He said, you know, the way to get past the white lab coat boys was to tell them that you saw the new Star Trek game, which was a mainframe game. Ted Nelson, there we go.
Ted Nelson, sure, sure.
So I
Yeah,
tried it. I was at Miami Heart Institute installing an intercom, right? That was my day job. And I went over to the computer lab. Remember, this is the old, mainframe lifted floors scene,
yeah.
white lab coats everywhere. And I went in and tried that line on. I said, yeah, I was down at the bank the other day installing it, and they said they had the latest version of Star Trek. He said, no, 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 no. He literally shut down the hospital's computer system so that he and I could play Star Trek, which was simply a grid of 9 asterisks for space, an S for the starship, and a K for the Klingons. And oh, it was hilarious. It was hilarious.
Yeah, I was not much into game playing. I was corporate from the government, then to Wall Street, and then to a consulting firm, and then back to Wall Street, then to another consulting firm. But my son was, and I'll never forget there was a computer show in Philadelphia that we went down to when he was 11, and he gave demonstrations to 100 people of games he was playing from the
Nice.
stage.
Okay.
And we
So
also
it was.
ran a fair for the United Nations school, and he and some other people did games while we talked about corporate stuff and spreadsheets and all that jazz. Yeah. So,
Yep. I basically ran the business side of a concert company on my little Atari 400. I had a spreadsheet on there. I did telecommunications, a database, the whole thing. And of course, my friends who ran the company said, "Oh, Rick, get yourself get a display writer. That's the way to really do that." And I said, "Well, look, if I can do spreadsheets, word processing, and telecommunication on a $1,000 box, why should I buy a $16,000 box to do the same thing?" But anyway, enough of that stuff. So you were
we
also
were
very
ve-
athletic.
we were very lucky because when my wife and I were leaving Morgan Stanley, we were going to go into mainframe financial consulting. That was our experience
Right.
running for big firms for Dean Wood and for Morgan Stanley. And I was standing by the elevator, and to go to lunch, and a friend comes up to wish us luck. And he said, "Have you seen the computer on Ben Rose's desk?" And I said, "Who's Ben Rose?" And no, he's a financial analyst for Morgan Stanley. So we went up there, and it was an Apple II, and all it did was there was a Microsoft game. It was tied in by modem to a weather service in Tennessee or someplace, and it had a Dow Jones market analyzer on it. So I said, "You ought to get one and just to fool around with." I, I got one, and 2 weeks later, Physical came out. Rosen had an advanced copy, gave it to us. It changed the whole business. Then we went to his conferences, and we met Jan Brooklyn and Bob Frankson, who became friends. And then we talked about it, and we installed it all over the place, all over the United States and Puerto Rico and in Mexico. And someone called Brooklyn from Popular Computer Magazine and asked him if he'd write something about how businesses use Physical. He said, "No, I don't do that. I'm running a company." He said, but you should talk to Barbara McMullen because she knows more about that than anyone." And that started us writing. So, so
Very good. Yeah, I was working for architects and engineers as AutoCAD and the AutoCAD type product, computer aided drafting, was migrating from the mainframe to the PC. And of course, the mainframe fellows were not pleased about this at all. They thought that was a horrible idea because they were losing control. But I
yeah,
was the young maverick guy who said, "Hey, I like to draw with computers. I like to do animation with computers, and if I can do it on a cheap box rather than a multi-million dollar box, hey, I was all ready for that." Ended up doing 2 and 3D animation for them with the Intergraph product, which was the more the government and civil engineer type of side of things. Okay, so you were very athletic as well. I imagine you wrote some interesting poetry about, or at least short stories anyway, about your athletic experiences.
Yeah, I talked about basketball because I was a basketball junkie for 45 years, 50 years. It wrecked my body, but it was all worth it. So
Well, that's good. That's good. Speaking of athletics, did you watch and enjoy the recent Olympics? They had Olympic
some of it,
basketball.
Steph Curry was the best deep shooter I've ever seen. I mean, he was unbelievable. I, I, I watched a good deal of it, but we're just recovering from COVID, and it's exhausted us. I'm tired all the time.
Yeah.
But I'm just getting over it now. So
Well, I'm glad to hear you're getting over it. Um, so as you were transitioning as a writer, both you were doing writing professionally, but you were also writing some for your amusement. When did you start doing performance poetry?
I started doing the poetry 45 years after I hadn't read a poem, and then I wrote for then when this fellow got me to submit to the magazine, then I started writing and submitting to many places. And then I started doing I had started uh, belonging to a, a writers group, an in-person writers group in Hoboken, New York. And before I was writing poetry, it was short stories and there was other stuff. And then I started doing poetry, and then COVID hit, and we went online. So I wound up picking up that, and I also host some other Zooms for a poetry workshop and for a publisher of mine down in Austin, Texas, and and this weekly writers group that's been going on for 26 years. But now I run it, so it keeps me busy.
I bet. Um, there's two kinds of theories about writing. One kind of leans toward the write every day, polish your craft. The other one says, no, no, wait until you're inspired. Wait until inspiration hits you. Where do you fall in that timeline or that spectrum from
Well,
writing every day to
that, that's
writing?
interesting. That's an interesting question. When I was writing about technology or sports, it was an idea or something that someone was going to pay me for, or I needed something for a magazine. Uh, with poetry, it's been things that hit me, and very often now, in the middle of the night, I'll come up with something, and I'll pick up my tablet, uh, and I'll put it into one of the writing things or the recording things, and then I'll get up in the morning and I'll polish it. But it's by ideas rather than things hitting me that I want to talk about.
Okay, thank you. I next question I typically like to ask my poets: uh, are there themes that you find yourself returning to regularly?
Most of my poetry is personal poetry about things that I either think about or my life. So I very often come back to a history or to a recounting of things, to family or to history or to sports or to why do I write or how do I write? So
Okay. Um, do you like to write social commentary? Do you write that sort of thing, or is it more personal focus?
I'm the poet laureate of the town of Yorktown, so there are themes that I have to stay away from. However, I do have two books that I haven't publicized there. I have something that I wrote in 2018 called The Trump File because I have long before our ex president got into politics. I was familiar with him in New York. Well, he was stiffing friends of mine and getting into all sorts of different activities, or going on the Howard Stern show and saying that his his greatest challenge during the Vietnam era was staying free of STD and stuff like that. So to have something called the Trump file. I also wrote something in 2020. It's a book I published called 2020, the year of the coronavirus. I was just looking through it the other day, and I find there is much in it that is also anti-Trump. So I don't promote that stuff, but I do have other books that are of other things like autobiographical and other things.
Another one of those spectrum questions from pole to pole is, you know, some people feel that a poet or an author, a thoughtful person, should be addressing societal concerns, or others say, no, you don't owe anybody anything. Write what you write, and that's that. Where do you fall on that spectrum, sir?
Uh, 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 I really write for myself because I got into it late. It wasn't like when I had magazine assignments or I wrote a weekly column for a local paper on technology and the impact of society. So that it was something that was aimed at. But poetry has always been what I wanted to write about at that moment. So it's not. I don't feel an obligation to do it. The only obligation that I feel is in the official position with the town. I don't feel that I can write very heavy political things. And as I mentioned, I have those other two books that are heavy, and I don't bring them up very often.
Okay. Another question I always like to ask my writer friends is narrative important for a good poem? You know, there are people that write what I might call not so much free verse, but uh, associative or metaphorical only without a narrative, and other people write a narrative. Do you feel narrative is important for you as a writer?
I do some now. I do much narrative, but I also, since I started late, it's all free verse. The writing groups that we belong to are like Therese Graham Birch writing is very heavy both on internal rhyme and external rhyme, and if anything that I write rhymes, it's just by luck or coincidence.
Okay. Yeah, I was early in the Vietnam era when I was writing and performing political poetry. I had a friend pull me aside and say, you know, Rick, you know, rhyming is just not done anymore. You want to be taken seriously, don't rhyme. And for me, it was very easy. I said, look, I write for my muse. If she likes to rhyme, I rhyme. She doesn't want to rhyme, I don't rhyme. I
Yeah.
write both kinds, but to me, I'm very muse driven, you know, very much inspiration driven. Okay, last question, sir, before we turn to you. The best part of the show is when you get to read. The question I have for you is, what kind of reading is sitting on your desk, is sitting on your bedside?
Uh, s- some novels, political stuff, some poetry, not much. I it's eclectic. It's a combination. I've read a lot of sport things. I've read a lot of writers I enjoy, like Breslin, Hamill. During college, I was a very I was I had very good marks in grammar school, and then I lost interest in high school. I was an underperformer in languages. Oh, and other people were reading Shakespeare. I was reading Mickey Spillane and Josh Hammett, and it was only so. But I was constantly reading. I was always reading something, carrying books around, and it was only when I got back into technology that I had to do things right. You know, and so I got much more disciplined. I skated through college, and but so, so if I look around at to what's right next to me, I've got Howell, I've got a political book by Bill O'Shaughnessy, who is a local author. I've got the Secret Lives of dogs. I've got all my books, and I've got all the ones I just mentioned. I have a house full of books, and I find it very hard to part with a book.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Do you want to take a moment before we start the second half with you reading, or are you ready to roll on?
I'm ready to go on, and I've put things in some order. I mentioned that my first poem, it was after I got involved with Bukowski. I'll write about that. But the first poem that I wrote for publication, it was based on a line that I'd seen in a motorcycle magazine. I've been a rider for years, not anymore though. And this is the one that got me started. Cashing a check. I just saw this wonderful line in a column in a motorcycle magazine. The mind writes checks that the body can't cash. The vision that many from my old neighborhood have of me is short and thin with a Pepsi in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Others will remember me as taller and thin, hitting a jumper from the corner or throwing a no-look pass to a cutter. Others will picture me at the end of the bar in a Broadstone with a pack of Pall Malls and a half-finished beer in a bar. John Gibson's I Can't Stop Loving You on the jukebox. Pat, one more when you have a chance. Age has taken the jumper. Diabetes has taken a Pepsi. Common sense has taken the cigarette and booze. I'm older and wiser and hopefully more tolerant. I am satisfied with my life, but to just be able once more fake the man guarding me and go up with a jumper and get nothing but net. To be able once more to cash that check. And then one theme that I've written about, and I'll talk about at the end, is how things just happened, and why they happened. So this is called The Fork in the Road. The great philosopher L.P. Berra, known to his friends and fans as Yogi, had many memorable expressions. No one goes there anymore. It's too crowded. It gets late out there, referring to the left field shadows at Yankee Stadium. And it's over till it's over, and many more. My favorite of all is when you come to the fork in the road, take it. To me, that this bit of wisdom has always meant when faced with a decision, make it. Sometimes the forks are clearly marked. I've been very lucky in choosing the path that I chose to wander down. It was a Saturday morning 60 years ago. I was driving a friend for us to take government tests, only because he asked me to. Doing this led me into a 50-year career with computers, something I knew nothing about at the time and which I had zero interest. When it comes to the fork in the road, take it. Years later, I made a presentation to a potential client. And while we didn't make a sale, I became very impressed with the female member of the evaluation team. 7 years later, I received a call from a client asking if I knew the same woman who was now applying for a job for the firm. I strongly recommended her. She got the job, and coincidentally, I joined the firm shortly thereafter. That was 44 years ago. Although it meant to us leaving over 10-year marriages and changing career paths. We've been married for 44 years. When it comes to the fork in the road, take it. We were starting our own consulting business, working with large computer systems, mainframes. When a friend saw us sitting by the elevator and came over to wish us luck, he asked if we had seen the computer on Ben Rosen's desk. We hadn't and didn't know who Ben Rosen was, but we went off to see him in the research department. He was electronics analyst, and the computer was an Apple II. It didn't do much, but I bought one to see how these new devices could work in our new business. 2 months later, the first spreadsheet, VisiCalc, was introduced. We had an early copy. There was tremendous demand for training. We were the only game in town, and our business changed totally from a mainframe consulting business to concentrate on this new world of personal computing. When it comes to the fork in the road, take it. And our connection with Ben Rosen, now a good friend, paid off when they invited us to a conference in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And we met the developers of VisiCalc, Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankson. When returning from an upstate New York consulting job, we stopped for dinner. There was only one other party in the dining room, an older couple. When I heard one mention Apple, I've jumped in and we talked about computing in a conversation. Uh, and at the end, he told me that I should join the Apple user group in New York City and told me all that it did. So I wound up becoming the president for 9 years. When we came to the fork in the road, take it. And because of our connections there, a dean of NYU was to teach a course. And that led us over the last 43 years teaching at 10 colleges between us. When it comes to the fork in the road, take it. In the meantime, National Popular Computing magazine asked Dan Brooklyn to write an article about how business people use VisiCalc. He demurred, but suggested that the editor speak to Bob McMullen, who knew more about this than anyone. He did, and while we had no plans to be writers, we've been writing for publication 40 years when it comes to the fork in the road. Take it. Even though I was an English major in college and read constantly fiction and nonfiction and wrote constantly for magazines and newspapers, I had no interest in poetry. Had neither written nor read any for 44 years. However, one day walking down an aisle in Barnes and Noble, I came across a book with a strange title. I took it off the shelf and back to my table. It was by a fellow named Charles Bukowski. I opened it and saw it was poetry. Well, my reaction was, ugh. I read some of it and found that Bukowski was an alcoholic, a misogynist and crazed, but also brilliant. I also decided that if this lunatic can do this, I can too. That was 22 years ago. Hundreds of poems, both in magazine journals and anthologies, 12 books of poetry published, and I'm the poet laureate of the 36,000 citizen town in Westchester, New York, when it comes to the fork in the road. Many choices to be made, a wonderful life. I took the fork in the road. And then I came back to Bukowski. I've told the story many times before, but we'll do it again. I just tell stories and call it poetry. I never liked poetry, although I started it as an English major in college. I never saw the point. I was a published writer, a reporter, a columnist, a reviewer, and author of books, over 2,500 pieces, but not a poet. Not a writer of poetry, not even a reader of 45 years. Since then, thousands of poems written, hundreds of them published in magazines, 10 books or chapbooks published, bookcases full of poetry books. What changed all this in my life? I was coming out of a restaurant in Barnes and Noble and walking down an aisle when I saw a book with a strange title. I picked it up and I looked at it. It was a book of poetry by Charles Bukowski. I read it anyhow. I was doomed. I recognized immediately that Bukowski was an alcoholic, a misogynist, more than a bit of a nut, fucking brilliant. And he made me want to try my hand, so I did. If you dislike my writing, blame Bukowski. He was profound too. If you like it, then say a prayer for his eternal soul. You might include mine as well. And then I went back to my history and how things changed in my life. The little black boy. When I was just 11, a little white boy, a little black boy changed my life. I grew up in an Irish Jewish neighborhood. That is understating it. There were few Italians, less Jews, and almost no Protestants, and no blacks. I heard about blacks. I cheered for Jackie Robinson, but didn't see what the big deal was. Why didn't they always let them play? But I also heard the terms that we all knew now as racist, coon, boogie, and of course the N-word. But I didn't see any of this a big deal either. We called each other shanty, lace curtain, stupid mix. Then I went to a Catholic grammar school track meet outside my neighborhood at night. I had to fight my parents to let me go. So I'm standing in a long line for a soda, and this little black kid, about 8 years old, was being a real pain in the ass, jumping all around, making noise, behaving like, well, an 8-year-old. Finally, he stepped on my toes. I grabbed him by the shoulders, shook him, and pushed him, saying, "Get out of here, little nigga." He ran off crying. I was still in line when he came back with his big brother. I immediately knew it was all over. These guys carry knives. I was dead. He came up to me and said, "Did you call my brother a nigger?" I gulped and said, "Yes." He looked at me harshly and said, "You're a Catholic. You should know better," and walked away. From then on, I knew better. If he just kicked the shit out of me as I expected, all I would have learned was to look for the big brother first. Then the neighborhood culture. I was born and raised in the Inwood section at the very top of Manhattan Island. It was an Irish Catholic Jewish section, and each group thought the neighborhood belonged to them. They were both right. It had three claims to fame then: a giant park with a large real forest, Columbia University's football stadium, and more bars than any in New York City. People came from all over to watch football, play in the park, and drink in the bars. Walter Winchell called it Ginwood in the press and on the radio. The legal drinking age in New York was 18 then, so we could start in the park at 15 or 16. When I first tasted beer, I didn't like it. That soon changed. We moved to the bars at 17 or 18, whether in the park or the bars, the beer was merely the catalyst. It was a conversation that bonded us. I no longer imbibe, in the words of the great sportsman Jimmy Cannon. I stopped drinking 25 years ago. I retired with the title. I know a number who fell into the bottle. Many of them did not. We became engineers, lawyers, accountants, writers, and technologists. Were it not for the half-quart cans of Pabst and the advent of the desktop computer, I would never have become a writer. So I owe a lot to the neighborhood and the culture. I go back once a month for luncheon. There are now very few bars. The neighborhood is Dominican at one end and gentrified and expensive at the other. The times and stores may be different, but the friendships and memories can live on. My Inwood is now a state of the mind. Who's got the church fee? So that's another one of my history poems, and we go to the bars, just naming the bars. I grew up in an Irish Jewish neighborhood. The Jewish led to the bars and studied. The Irish went to the bars. To be sure, many of us also went to school and played sports when I was girls. No sex, though. But we went to the bars underage, after games, after dates, after softball games, before and after dances, to watch the Sunday football game, and for every other damn reason. The Broadsons, the Willow Tree, Aaron's Isle, Chambers, McSherry's, the Inwood Lounge, Doc Fiddler's, Cassie's, Jimmy Ryan's, Dolan's, the Pig and Whistle. Well, you get the idea. We knew the bartenders by name: George Lynch, Pat Gallup, Sunshine, and I all bought back. The next one's on me, Mac, and you never left after a buyback. Oh, we hung out there, we talked, we laughed, we sang, we sometimes fought, and we drank. But we just didn't drink in the bars. We drank in the park, we drank at parties, we drank at football games, we drank at dances from a flask. Many slowed down as they grew up. Many stopped altogether, and some only stopped by the grave. The drink was a macho fact. If you told a person they had diabetes, he'd stop taking sugar. If you told some of my friends they shouldn't drink, they'd say, "What do you mean I can hold my liquor?" They planned to drink until they died, and they did. I still think we had more fun than the Jewish guys, unless they were getting laid. And then a very good friend of mine that people have heard me talk about, when Chicky comes marching home again. The Marine Private John Charles Dunny was home from Paris Island, and the crowd was all where we belonged at the stage of our lives in the Broadstone. But there was sadness along with the joy, because Private Dunny was now going to Okinawa. Okinawa. But like MacArthur, Chick rose up from the stool and roared, "I shall return," and took off a dog tag and a chain and handed it to Inwood's best bartender, Pat Gallagher. And I always remember what you drank, and after the third, there was always a knock on the bar. "This one's on me, Mac," and you never left after a buyback. Anyway, Pat takes a chain and fastens the dog tag to a big gold chain holding a large clock over the bar. And they're all standing until Chicky comes marching home again. Often over the next 18 months, someone could point to the chain and offer a toast to Chicky, defending us in Okinawa. And then it happens like MacArthur or John Wayne, Chick is delivered back to us and it's off to the stone. Pat buys a few rounds for the bar. Chick reclaims his dog tag, the beer flows, and there's much singing and good cheer. After many hours, I take my leave. This has been a joyous education. The dog tag has been reclaimed and Chick has come marching home. It's a pity I didn't stay a bit longer to see our hero get in a fight by the pinball machine, hit the other miscreants over the head with the iron puck, and get barred from the joint. Drum roll, please. And legend began to grow. And now Chick, the high school dropout, is usually the only one in the room with a message from Harvard. And to digress for a moment, he was a Marine, he was a merchant Marine. He was also, when he was a merchant marine. It was during the anti-Vietnam protests, and one of our nut patriots was a bartender. Said someone's got to go over there and buy those guys a beer. They'll have forgotten it. They'll think we forgot about them. Give me your papers. And Chick said no, he couldn't do this. They were his papers, but he'd go. So he went to Vietnam on an ammunition ship. He hits all to combat zones with bags full of beer, and he eventually got caught in the Tet Offensive, and eventually got home. Then became a sandhog, then a labor leader, then went to Harvard for a master's, and he wrote a wonderful book called "The Greatest Beer Run Ever," that became a movie last year. So things went well for him. Speaking of the military service, 6 months wonder. I was too young for Korea, although I had a friend whose older brother died there. I was too old for Vietnam, although I had friends whose younger brother died there. I was working as a civilian for the Department of the Army and was pressured to get my military obligation out of the way. So I spent from November 1962 through May 1963 in Fort Dix, New Jersey as a 6 months wonder. I hated it. It was boring, repetitious, and an awful lot of chicken shit. I want to get on with my life. It was only later that I got to realize how much I learned in just these few months. The Irish Council in New York City worked with a Protestant from Alabama who thought that the Pope was a heretic. The college English major found common ground with high school dropouts who thought reading was a big waste of time. The local basketball gym rat and fanatic found the same teamwork as part of an artillery crew. The kid from the lily white neighborhood of Inwood saw his black platoon buddies suffer bigotry and exclusion in Lawton. The team of spit shining shoes and cleaning a rifle with a toothbrush made me do things right. It was only much later that I found the answer to my constant question, what is this good training for? The answer was life. Then I have a long one that I'm not going to read about this segregation, but one more about Oklahoma. Oklahoma weather. Forever and a day ago, too many years to count, I was in Lawton, Oklahoma in the Army. Many New Yorkers were with me and found many reasons to complain. One of the constant complaints was the weather. We had never seen anything like it. The temperature could swing 30 to 40 degrees in a few hours. If the wind across the plains was coming up from Mexico, hot as hell, if down from Illinois, cold as that witch's tit. We even had a name for it, fucking Oklahoma weather. 2 years ago, fucking Oklahoma weather came to New York and stayed. And then another Oklahoma, I lit Gordon McRae's cigarette. I was standing at the bar in a restaurant in Shea Stadium after the World Series game in 1969. I lit a cigarette. You could smoke in bars then, as I tried to figure out why no money was changing hands over the bar. Just then, the fellow next to me asked me for a light, and as I turned to light his cigarette, I recognized it was Gordon McRae who had sung the national anthem before the game. Over Gordon's head, I saw Joe DiMaggio talking to Earl Warren at the end of the bar, and I realized I was not in a public restaurant. It turned out I was in the private club of the owner of the Mets, so I stayed. But I did not want to just sound like a fan, so I did not tell Gordon how much I liked him in the movie version of Oklahoma. I also did not tell him how much I despised the state of Oklahoma, having spent 5 long years there between January 1962 and April 1962 while in the Army. It was only 4 months. Well, it felt like 5 years. Lawton was the 3rd largest city in the state and had no industry other than Fort Sill, where I was. It had bars, many private clubs, hotels, clip joint girls, anything that could separate a GI from his meager wages. It was a divided city that had a Mexican section, Indian section, a black section, a white soda section, a white real people section. And for the first time, this New Yorker saw institutionalized segregation and bigotry. About 25 years later, I met a woman from Lawton and told her black members of my unit being refused service in a bar where I was. I left with them. I then said, I'm sure things have changed in the last 25 years. And she responded, not so much. I told Gordon none of this. I just lit a cigarette. And then I'll go to perfection. I do many things well, if I may say so myself. I even do some things very well. I do some things not so well. That's my wife. But even for most of the things I do very well, I do not do perfectly. There was always something about most efforts, even this poem, that could be done better. I know because at times I've done some things perfectly, at least one thing. I faked my defender, dribbled into court, gone up in the air, released, I got nothing but net. As the ball drops through and I start down the court, I know there is nothing that I could have done better at that instant. If only I could get the same feeling from many more things. Life is not a jump shot. And I stayed with basketball. That said, I was a basketball whore. I was a basketball whore. I played in the park. I played soil ball. I played for the Episcopal Church. I played for a league at the Jewish Y. I played intramural ball in college. I was preferred with gym rat in college, playing between classes, and often should have been in class. I went to Iona College. I really majored in basketball and Beachmont. The Beachmont is the bar across the street from the college and from Inwood. I grew up small and grew late in college. I was a good ball player, then for a while a very good ball player, then a pretty good player, then a good player again, and finally an okay player when I finally stopped in my mid-50s. I played in leagues on Wall Street. I played in open leagues around Manhattan and the Bronx. I played in leagues in Westchester and pick up for 2 hours most Sunday mornings. Now I have regular cortisone shots in my knees and hips. I've had minor surgery in both knees and jelly pumped into them. No cartilage in my knees or ankles and arthritis all through my back, hips, knees, and ankles. And my right ankle brings a limp and constant pain. If the most recent shot, a 24/7 brace doesn't work, then it's fusion or replacement, not a happy scenario. My orthopedist, and I'll play himself, says it's all from basketball. But only known then, back in my basketball days, what I know now, I wouldn't have changed a fucking thing. Poetry became my new basketball. From the time I was 12 to over 60, basketball was the one constant in my life. It took me through changes in schools, aspirations, careers, marriages, parenthood, residence. I was small in high school and only grew too late to play in college. That didn't stop me, though. I played for Catholic Serio teams in Alaska, in a local Episcopal church for a league of the Jewish Y, in leagues in Wall Street, Westchester, Inwood, and pick up wherever I could get a game. Basketball gave me what's known medically as a fura, ARFURA, a really fucked up right ankle. No tendons or ligaments, arthritis, bone spurs that won't keep me out of an army, and caused a ruptured tendon in my leg. Additionally, I've had 2 minor knee operations, jelly pumped into both knees, arthritis in both hips. While it was all worth it, basketball has crippled my body. Will poetry do the same to my brain? How are we running time-wise?
Fine. You got about 10
Okay.
minutes left?
I've got 2 sports ones. Ted, September 28th, 1941, 82 years ago today, the last day of the baseball season, Ted Williams went 6 for 8 and doubleheaded to finish at 406, the last player to hit 482 years ago. 16 years later, he hit 388 to win his 5th batting championship, beating the runner-up Mickey Mantle by 23 points, and won his 6th and last championship the year after. He won 2 triple crowns, batting average, home runs, and runs batted in 1942 and 47. In his career, he had the highest batting average and most home runs and RBIs of any player who played in those years. A triple crown career. What was the most remarkable was with the fact that he lost parts of 5 years to military service in World War II in Korea, landing a burning jet in Korea, getting pneumonia in the process. Another American hero, Colonel and astronaut John Glenn, called baseball hero Williams the greatest wingman I have ever had. Williams is the only man in both the Baseball Hall of Fame and the Fly Fishing Hall of Fame. It is fashionable today to call people GOAT, GOATS, the greatest of all time. I never saw a Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, or Rogers Hornsby. All I can say is that Theodore Samuel Williams is the best I ever saw. And then one more of that type, Lawrence Peter. Lawrence Peter Berra, yogi to most, is known for his supposed misstatements as well as his baseball process. Yes, I've seen his famous statements as brilliant and metaphor, perhaps made from a limited vocabulary. Yogi, due to his immigrant family upbringing and World War II serve, did not see much formal education, leaving school after the 8th grade. My favorite one, I've even written a poem about, is when you come to the fork in the road, take it. To me, that means make a decision and follow it. Don't freeze. And I've made them, and luckily made the right ones. Another famous one is, it ain't over till it's over. Good advice for any competition, sport, legal, politics, play it right to the end. Some seem confusing when you think about them. No one goes there nowadays, it's too crowded. We all know good restaurants that have gotten so popular that the food isn't worth the wait. Like a slate earlier, they're referring to the left field in Yankee Stadium. The stadium shadows make outfield play difficult in the afternoon. The future ain't what it used to be. Recent developments in economics, politics, the world of technology, and morality have made the future less promising than was. They go on and on. Lawrence Peter Yogi Berra was some smart individual and a hell of a ball player. And we start moving toward the end with important people. Over the years, through no fault of my own, I've been around many important people. I've held Eleanor Roosevelt's coat, lit Gordon McCrae's cigarette, talked baseball with Casey Stengel, taught football with Weave Eubank, exchanged pleasantries with Pearl Bailey, basked in the presence of Lena Horne, interviewed Steve Jobs, discussed history with Arthur Schlesinger Jr., been in the room with Lauren Bacall, reminisced about my late father with ex-New York City Mayor Bob Wagner, talked writing with George Clinton and David Howson, speculated about technology with Bill Gates, talked basketball and politics with Governor George Pataki. But the most important person with whom I've ever spent any time with is Barbara McMullen, my wife of 43 years. And then there's something about my meeting Barbara. I first met Barbara when, as an officer of a technology consulting firm, I made a presentation to the firm where she worked. But she struck me as being exceptionally sharp. And when the other two people from her firm and two from mine had lunch, I made sure that I sat next to her. That was the last that I saw of her for 5 years. In the meantime, we sold my firm to a larger one, and I became responsible for all computer system installations at the most larger firm. One of the firms that we installed a large system at was a very prestigious Wall Street firm, Morgan Stanley. I became personally involved with the installation. About a year after the system was installed, I got a call from the person in charge of Morgan Stanley computer systems to ask if I heard of a person whose resume he just received. It was the same one I remember from 5 years before. I had no contact with it all that time, but I'd asked about it when I met people from a firm and always good reports, and therefore I gave a glowing reference. When I heard that she had accepted the position and started her new job, I called to congratulate her, and she thanked me, called me Tom. 3 months later, I was offered an executive position at Morgan Stanley and accepted it. In the first 3 months in my new position, I spent a good deal of time in San Francisco, overseeing the operational cycle of a firm acquired by Morgan Stanley. In late autumn, I was back in New York full time, and my only interaction with Bob was in the office and related to business. On December 8th, in the late afternoon, we were forced out of our offices by a bomb scare, and after milling around in the lobby, many moved to a nearby pub, and for the first time, I sat at a table with Barbara. On December 27th, I told her I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. It took until the following May 12th to finally begin our total lives together, a move that took courage, commitment, naivete, confidence, and love. We did it anyhow. That was 43 years ago, and in the time together, we have helped raise 2 terrific children, built a consulting business that took us to 14 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and Mexico, taught in 10 different colleges and universities, written 10 books and contributed to encyclopedias and anthologies, produced hundreds of poems, been active in technology, and always been in love. Barbara McMullen, I love you. And then my luck holds. Once again, my luck seems to hold. I was in my urologist's office for a test, but I have the chest pain. He takes my blood pressure just through the roof. Cancel the test and sends me right to the hospital. I'm there from Monday to Friday. I have a stent put in to bypass a clogged artery. I'm scheduled for a valve repair or replacement. If I hadn't been in his office, I would have just blown off the pain. All my life, I've been very lucky just being in the right place at the right time. It has determined my profession, my life partner, the focus of our business, and made me a writer, college professor, and poet. In short, as Rocky Graziano once said, someone up there likes me. Once more, it seems that my luck has got me through a crisis. The main questions are, will it continue? And for how long? And related to that procedure, who would have thunk? Who would have thunk that you could put something into the arteries around the heart by punching a hole in the wrist? Thankfully, a legendary Cleveland Clinic doctor named Mason Soames did, and why I have marks in my arm and a stent around my heart. That's why it's called the Soames technique. Thank you very much, Dr. Soames. And one last on the technology, and then we're hitting the end. The miracles of technology. A month ago, I got a stent put into my heart. It was done to an incision and the rest. I went home the next day. Last week, I had the valve put into my heart. It was done through 2 incisions in my groin. I went home the next day. I was sent home with a cardiac monitor attached to my chest and a modified cell phone that would transfer my readings to a service that would then transfer them to my medical group. Years ago, these procedures would have been cutting into my chest and expended hospital stay. These technological miracles aren't limited to medicine. Think about town government where taxes and fees are paid online. The board meetings are watched online. Board members are reachable by email. Those here for the good old days could rather appreciate the here and now. Remember, it was like it was yesterday. It was July 4th, 1983, 41 years ago this month, and I was sitting in the stands at Yankee Stadium with my wife, Barbara, my brother, Robert, our buddy, and his wife, Beatrice, to watch the New York Yankees play the Boston Red Sox. My brother, a model of Christian charity, was the best person I ever knew. It had been 25 years in religious order, serving most recently as the principal of Powell Memorial Academy, where young Ferdinand Lewis Alcindor, the led Kareem Abdul-Jabbar attended. Bud was a true nut Red Sox fan, having spent a 6th grade year in Boston and becoming sucked into Fenway fever, while the rest of us rooted for the Yankees. As the game went on, you could sense history in the air. Yankee pitcher Dave Righetti was shutting down the Red Sox without a hit. The closer it got to the 9th inning, the more it became apparent that the entire stadium attendance was worth the drama. Finally, with 2 outs in the 9th, and coming to bat for the Red Sox, there seemed to be 5-time batting champion third baseman Wade Boggs. Just then, Barbara leans over and asks Bud, "Are you rooting for the no-hitter now?" His only reply was a deep scowl and a no. Boggs struck out anyhow. The no-hitter went into the books, and Bud did not speak to Barbara for over an hour. To see this 60-year-old man with 4 master's degrees and 40 years of teaching behind him, reduced a childish tantrum because his team had let him down, was kind of neat and funny. The little kid in all of us had shown itself. Then we have, coming to the last 3, July 25, 2024. My father would have been 120 today on his birthday, except he died on March 11th, 1951 at the age of 41. A single piece of ice under a trick D An apartment house courtyard changed a lot of lives. My mother's at age 49, my brother's at age 27, mine at 11. Plans made, plans undone, the unplanned fork in the road, new addresses, new schools, new jobs. Hey, that's life. That's death. That's life. We adapt, make a new plan, start over, and do it as often as we have to. As Mr. Sinatra sang in 1966, every time I find myself flat on my face, I pick myself up and get back in a race. That's life. And then, if, a very personal poem. If I did not do a favor for a college friend and drive him to a government test, I never would have gone to work for the government. If I did not go to work for the government, I never would have been involved with computers. If I did not get forced out of a job I loved, I never would have gone to work for a consulting firm and met the fair Barbara. If I did not join Morgan Stanley 4 years later, I wouldn't have met the fair Barbara again and loved with her. If Barbara and I did not give up smoking 45 years ago, we'd be dead by now. If Barbara and I did not meet Ben Rose and Morgan Stanley, we never would have seen the Apple II and first electronic spreadsheet and built an international consulting firm. If we did not have the consulting firm, we would not have become writers and college professors. If I did not spend time with Dan Berrigan, a friend and a hero, I would never have made the connection between peace activism and religious commitment. If I did not have happened to read a poem by Charles Bukowski, the first poem I read in 44 years, I would not have become a published poet and the poet laureate of his 36,000 citizen Westchester, New York town. If I had not become a poet, I never would have been able to write openly about my feelings. If I did not become familiar with the writing and example of Therese Crane Birch, I never would have returned to prayer. If all of the above did not happen, I never would have realized I'm the luckiest man in the world. If I'm not the luckiest man in the world, I would not have written this poem at 2 a.m. on Barbara's birthday in our 46 year together. And the next day, my poetry, a reflection. Reading my most recent poem, my editor, most severe critic and wife, Bob McMullen, said, "You've written about this many times before." She, of course, correct. She always is. It's a poem about how I got where I am. A reflection, and I've written about it in many different ways. Was it simply luck, God's plan, predestination? I always thought it was choices, many forks in the road, but I never reflected on it until I moved to poetry. I just did father's death, military school, back to New York, basketball, good school and college, technology, marriage, children, divorce, business ownership, moved to rural life, coping, coasting through school, reading James T. Farrell and Mickey Spillane instead of Shakespeare, unperforming at Latin and French, doing enough to get by, while living the embossing and trying to drink up all this beer. And basketball, jump shot, see the man, pass 2 points, defend the opposition, go to the hoop. A good, sometimes very good player. A local and club player, never any higher. For 50 years, then done. Military, teamwork, see bigotry and discrimination, learn much without realizing it. Technology, no more coasting, do it right, compete, success, win, lose, win big. Never really reflecting, just do. Wonderful wife of 40 years, wonderful pets, wonderful children, writing, teaching, more just doing. Then poetry, reflection, how I got where I am. Religion, God, why am I still here at almost 85 when so many family and friends are not? Are there any answers? Poetry makes me think and try to figure it out. So I will continue until the next life, if there is a next life.
Thank you so very much, John. Really wonderful.
Many poems?
That was wonderful. You want to do one more?
No, I don't have any more.
Oh.
That I
Well,
laid out anyhow. So.
Then I guess we're done for now. Sir, thank you so very much. Very interesting work. And I really enjoy how your work is so biographical. We learned a lot about the person, John F. McMullen, wonderful fellow.
Thank you very much, sir. And you
My
send me the link.
Will do, will do. On behalf of Poets of the East, sir, thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night.
And the same to you, Rick, and I will see you next Tuesday.
Okay, bye-bye.